Good morning, church. Today we want to look at Jesus washing feet. To get you into the idea of what this means for Jesus to wash your feet, I need to ask you, when was the moment in your life when you felt the most betrayed? See, that's what's happening here as Jesus washes feet. It probably wasn't when an enemy came at you. It probably was when a good friend stabbed you in the back. I can think of only a handful of times, maybe 3 times, that I've ever experienced this. Many, many years ago when we came out of Africa and we were struggling, we were down and out. I remember 2 people that I really, really respected gossiping about me. I was standing just around the corner in a cubicle and they never knew I was there. I also have these ears that can zone in and pick up on conversations quite far away from me. It was without a doubt an incredibly humiliating experience. See, when we see Jesus washing feet, we don't see what's actually happening, that he's having to wash Judas's feet. Now, who is Jesus? That's God, right? Who's Judas? You know, out of all the 12 there, who would you think would be the humblest and most loving person? Maybe I must include Jesus and say out of 13, who would be there, right? And I really don't want you to compare yourself to Jesus, because you're not. None of us are. We fall way short of Jesus. But then go a step up, and who would be the humblest of the 12 apostles? Who would be the most loving of the 12 apostles? Well, since that's not easy to figure out, we can do the opposite. Who do you think is the most arrogant of the apostles? Who do you think is the least loving of the apostles? Now, that's the person, Jesus' dear friend, the man who attended the University of Jesus, the one who had listened to sermon after sermon of Jesus. He's the one that's going to do it. There are 4 major discourses in the New Testament. There's the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. There's Luke chapter 15, the kingdom parables. There is the last hour in Mark 13, Matthew 24, and I believe Luke 21. They're synonymous of when's the last hour. That was a major discourse. This is the 4th major discourse. It starts from John chapter 13 and it goes all the way through to John chapter 16. And then you will find John chapter 17. So in this situation, you will find that Jesus is loving his disciples. All 3 chapters is Jesus loving the disciples. So what does it mean when Jesus loves the disciples? How does he do it? He takes a bucket of water, he fills it up. They've obviously come from a home, probably Bethany. They probably were at Martha, Mary, and Lazarus' home. They've probably just bathed. But they've walked at least 2 miles. Maybe they've done some other routes. And their feet, because it's open-toed shoes, are not smelling good. Their shoes are stinking. Their feet are stinking. And brethren, there's a whole bunch of us that oftentimes stinks and has to be ministered to. And so Jesus asked them to prepare a room, and they prepared everything except one thing. They forgot to get the basin of water and the towel and arrange for someone to wash feet. Now, normally, it would be the lowest slave. It couldn't be a Jew. It had to be a foreigner, somebody really low on the totem pole. If it wasn't that, and there was only like a husband and wife, it would be the wife, and she'd wash her husband's feet, and normally it would be reciprocal, so they could be washing each other's feet. But that preparation hadn't been made. And what would happen is you would sit in a semicircle, a U shape, and you would lean on your left shoulder, your left elbow, and you would eat with your right hand. You wouldn't be sitting, you'd be kind of laying down. Now, this is where Jesus would be seated or sitting to eat, and right there, right here, would be John, the apostle that he loved. And we know that from later on, because Peter would say, who's going to betray him? Ask him. And then you'd have to ask, Jesus. And Jesus would say something about he who dips his hand in the morsel in this with me is going to be him. And so the story continues. But the idea is not too far from where your head is going to be somebody's feet. Now, if you remember in John chapter 12, there was one person at this table whose feet probably still smelled good. Anybody want to guess whose feet still smell good? Because Mary had washed those feet with a very, very nice ointment, a perfume. It was Jesus. So John probably didn't have it too bad, but come all the way around and this way. Whose feet is right here by Jesus? I don't know, but I imagine the aroma was there. Now, those of you who have had lamb, you would know that lamb tastes really, really nice. But it also has a very specific smell. And those of us who eat lamb, we like that smell. So you have this really nice smell coming from in front of you and this poignant smell coming from behind you. And so he takes this water, because nobody's thought about doing this, and he goes in front of them. He takes off his clothes. He's basically got his boxers, his underpants on. And he takes that and he puts a towel around and he takes a basin of water. Now, in these areas, there are two people. There's people eating and there's people serving. So there's very highly likely there's women in this room as well. This is incredibly embarrassing what's just happened here. But it's about to get more embarrassing, because then he goes and he washes one set of feet after the next until he comes to Peter. Me? You're going to wash my feet? No, I don't think so. Peter is always arguing with God. Go to Jerusalem? I don't think so. To die? I'm going to withstand you. Let Malchus and these soldiers take you? I won't. I don't think so. I'll just chop off his head. And whoop, he turns and he lobs off Malchus's right ear. What? This sheet that's coming down in Acts 10 3 times? You think I'm going to eat? No, I'm not going to eat that. He's constantly arguing with God. But the thing about it, Peter sins overtly, Judas sins covertly. There's a big difference here, church. There's a big difference. Before Jesus dies, within 24 hours, one of these people is going to die. And I'll give you a hint. It's the least loving, it's the most arrogant person, and it's the most angry person, the least loving person in this room. And just because we know what's actually behind it, it's the most greedy person is going to die. And he's going to be facing the living God. But this is very discouraging what's happening here. And he says, Peter, if I don't wash you, then you're none of mine. Well, Lord, wash the whole of me. And no, you just need your feet clean because you've already done this, and we'll go through that in a little while. And so he also acknowledges that he's given them a pattern, he's given them an example, and they need to do likewise. So whatever this washing of feet is, we need to do likewise. So let me tell you what it's not. What it's not is actually washing feet. And the reason we know that is because if it was washing feet, Paul the apostle would have told us in detail how to do it, right? He would have spelled out, this is what you need to do. The Acts of the Apostles would have had many examples of somebody actually having their feet washed. So it can't be that. We also know church history would have a lot. But he says, I, your Lord and Master, have given you an example of what to do. Go and do likewise. Do it for one another. So we need to know what's he doing. And so that's what I want to prepare you for. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to see Jesus prepping for feet washing. Then we're going to see Jesus actually having the protest of Peter as he deals with that. And then we're going to see the pattern that he's giving them. So it's a real simple thing. And I don't want you to focus as much on what I've got on the board as what the message is that's hidden throughout this. I'm going to give it to you right off the bat. And then you see, and let this message just get bolder and bolder and bolder with you. If you are very humble, you're going to love much. If you love much, you're going to be very humble. But you cannot be humble if you don't love, and you cannot love if you're not humble. And the most humble person we know is the person who loved the most. The most humble person we know is Jesus, who came down, took off his clothes, his heavenly clothes, his position of deity and his privileges of deity. He took on human form. He came low. And then when he was on this earth, he went even lower and he stooped to wash feet. And then he went even lower to die on a cross for you and me. Why? Because he loved much. He loved much. And if you and I don't get this example, we've missed it. We will not make it to heaven. You cannot make it to heaven. How many times have you heard me say this? You cannot make it to heaven if you're prideful and selfish. You can boil everything down to those two things. And in order to be humble, you cannot be selfish and you cannot be prideful. You've got to get rid of it. And so go with me as we look first off at this preparation. Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew his hour had come to depart of this world to the Father, Jesus' timetable is impeccable. He knows the hour has come. 6 times in John, the hour is mentioned. Remember in John chapter 2 at the feast of the wedding, when Mary says, I want you to perform this miracle, he says, my hour has not yet come. And then he says again, my hour is not yet come, another place. And then we come to John chapter 12, just a chapter before this, and he says, my hour has come. And now we have in John chapter 13, later on, he says, my hour has come. And then he says to Judas, what Satan has put into your heart, go and do quickly. Go and do quickly. Why? Because God's got a timetable. This is the Passover. And on the Passover you have Exodus, and you have the blood of the Lamb on the top of every door. And wherever that blood was, the avenging angel would go, the angel of death would go away, he would go over. And same with you. Wherever the blood of the Lamb is over here, you will be okay. It'll go over you. So the time has to be when Jesus, tomorrow morning, this is now Thursday, next day is is Friday, and he will be crucified. This is the day before he has to die. And the hour has come. But listen to these words and tell me if they don't touch you like they touch me. When Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own, he loved them to the end. Doesn't that just get you? Having loved his own, he loved them to the end. But what enabled him to endure this unbelievable humiliation of Judas over there? I don't know what nice way I can phrase it for you. I know in my colloquial language that I grew up in, it would be like this little pipsqueak. This little arrogant, good for nothing, has it in his heart to kill the Son of God. What enabled Jesus to endure that instead of calling down 10,000 angels, right? What enabled him to endure that? What enables you to endure it when you are discouraged, when people are not kind to you, when people are not tender-hearted with you, when people are not forgiving with you, when people are not building you up but breaking you down? What enables you to endure it? It's very simple. He's going to be with the Father. That's what it is. He's going to be with the Father. And as I look across this audience, I see some people that have really had a hard time lately. Is there anyone here that hasn't heard of COVID? Anyone? Right? There's been some pretty hard times, guys. It's pretty tough. It's very discouraging. You know? I really like the good news and the bad news, Bill. So let me see if I can give some good news and bad news. Okay, here it is. The 2020 U.S. presidential election, 104 days, 1 hour, 34 minutes, and 48 seconds, guys. And then it's over, right? There's good news and bad news in there. We have to endure a little bit. And then good news, it's over, right? And then our world can start becoming encouraged again. But what enables you to keep your mouth shut when somebody is obviously being very ignorant and uninformed and telling you all these things, that make no sense? Well, it's exactly this year. We're meant to be humble. We're not meant to win these battles. We're meant to lose these battles. We're meant to not be selfish. We're meant to be humble And it's the fact that there's good news, right? Well, it's going to end. But the good news here is it's going to end because we're going to be with the Father. And that is a tremendous thing that he's saying for us here. During the supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son. What a legacy for Simon to have, that his son was Judas. Verse 3, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands. What does that mean? Don't miss it. He's given all things into his hands. Brad, I heard you got a pretty interesting bow, right? And very few people can pull that. I've even heard one very strong man confess that he can't pull back your bow. That makes you what? Pretty strong, right? How about if you had that kind of power? And he'd put all things under he is the absolutely most powerful person at that moment that Judas is doing this to him. Not only that, he knows that Judas it's in his heart. Is Satan omniscient? Well, let me ask you an easy one. Is Satan omnipresent? Is Satan everywhere all the time? No, God is. Satan can only be at one place at a time. And I doubt if he's here, because if he's here, then he's not there, But I'm suspecting, and by the way, he's got cohorts that are everywhere all the time, right? But I think Satan himself was either right there outside that door or standing right behind Judas. And what was being, we would say the Lord's Supper was being served. And Satan's there. Oh my goodness, what's happening? And Jesus, knowing that all things, that the Father had given all things, is very powerful. And that he had come from God, listen carefully here, and was what? Going back to God. Church, that's the mission. It's not what the world's doing to you or trying to do to you. It's the fact that you and I are every single moment, every single day, every single hour, every single second, we're getting closer and closer and closer to being back with God. Verse 4, knowing all of this, rose up from supper. He laid aside his outer garments and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them down with a towel that was wrapped around him. What is the most disgusting thing you've ever had to do? I was a preteen and there was a little manhole and no one could fit into it, but I was as skinny as you can believe. You couldn't believe how skinny I was. I mean, I was nothing. If the wind blew, I would just blow away. I could fit down that manhole, and it was pretty disgusting. And I learned something that day. If you're going to do something in this world, whether it's a little bit dirty or very dirty, commit completely or you're not going to get the job done. I think some of you know what I'm... Right, Glenn, you know that, right? If you're trying to do it halfway, something's going to go wrong. Just forget about it. Put your gloves on if you need to have gloves on, but get in there and clean it out. That was pretty bad. But not as bad as when I was sitting in Nairobi, Kenya, in my office with a classroom full, in a little classroom full of students. And none of them had closed shoes. Even if one person was in that room at that time, I promise you not one of you would be able to sit there without looking really funny, like turning green. It is the most awful smell I've ever smelled in my life. Now, Nairobi's rainfall is really high, and the sewage sprays 10 foot, 12 foot, I'm not lying now. I'm seriously telling you, it gets clogged and that sewage comes up 12 foot into the air. I mean, it hits everything. Definitely if you're walking. It's the most unbelievable smell you've ever smelled. And this is very, very proud people. You daren't notice it. It took me 3 months before I would not want to throw up and before I was used to the smell. I can imagine a little bit of what it must have smelled around that table before Jesus did this. And so I'm asking you, what is the most disgusting thing you ever had to have done? It's not even near this. I would say, imagine the Queen of England coming into that room that I'm talking to you about and washing everybody's feet. Could you imagine her doing that? Well, that's the Queen of England. That is not the Son of God. That's not the creator of the universe. It's the creator of the universe coming there and realizing he's even going to wash Judas's feet. Verse 6. We have the prepping and now we have the protesting. Whenever God calls you, it's not an easy thing. I remember we had a really, really good preacher last Sunday. Thank you so much, Riley. That was excellent. But he talked about one of the things, if you've sat in church and this guy comes looking for volunteers, right, Adam? and the people kind of sort of melt into the pew. They want to just sink down to the ground because that's humiliating. You know, standing up in front of a group of people is a very hard thing to do. It's a very vulnerable thing to do whenever you're doing this. You're very, very vulnerable. And 9 times out of 10, if it's your first time, people are going to come to you and say, you know what? You said, too much. Or you kept looking out the window. Or you kept touching your ear. Or they'll say something. And I know they mean well, but you're vulnerable. And now they've just gone and clobbered you. That's really awful, all right? And so you want to disappear. So one of the most humbling things you can do is say yes to Adam. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered him, what I am doing now you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand. He doesn't understand about being clean yet. He doesn't understand about getting rid of sin yet. He might understand about forgiveness, but I don't think he understands about clean. You know, I've had so many people hurt so badly. And then I will talk to them about, how did you feel just after that happened? And they will say, you know, I went and I stood in the shower and I just washed and washed and washed and I couldn't get it away. And they can understand that they could forgive that person. They can understand what forgiveness is, forgive themselves or whatever. But they don't understand that Jesus could do more than forgive. Jesus can clean your heart. If you've been really hurt, Jesus can clean your heart. Peter said, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus said, if I do not wash you, you have no share with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, the one who is bathed does not have need to wash, except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean. Sanctify them with your word. Sanctify them with truth. Your word is truth. John 17:17. He would say these words just a little while later. They've been in the University of Jesus. All of them have been listening, but there's one person who wasn't listening when this preaching was going on, when Jesus was talking. He was greedy. He was thinking about, oh, we can sell this ointment for so much and put it in the oil, and I can steal it. You know, he wasn't focused. He wasn't there. He wasn't present. And you are clean, but not every one of you. For he knew who was to betray him. That was why he said, not all of you are clean. So what I encourage you to do is when humiliation comes your way, initially reject it, but then slowly accept it, because this is for your own good. We're not going to make it to heaven proud, church. I think sometimes that's why God lets us get old, because there's very little pride when you get old. But finally, we come to a pattern, and this is what I want you to really get. You need to get something out of this lesson that God is telling you to do. Many years ago, I was in a church where the ladies would do the hair of some of the people in the old age home, and it was people with dementia and all kinds of stuff, and there would always be one lady that they would talk about that was interesting. But other than that, I never would have known that they were doing it. They weren't doing it for praise. I had a client this week. I asked her, if you could have an ideal job. She's got a job. She keeps the family going and stuff, and it's a pretty good job. I said, but it's not 100%. I said, if you could have your ideal job, what would it be? She said, there would be no money in it. But if I can take care of older people, if I can just sit and talk with them, I'd be so happy. I know that we have a lot going on, and I don't want to, bring one person out and make us a little bit sad. But Natalie, we're going to miss you. When I think of one person that was interested in the feet of people who are homeless, I can't think but think of Natalie. Now, who would have thought about that, right? It's these little things that in her life might not even be a major bump that really has an impact on saints and a permanent impression. But when he had washed their feet and put on the outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought also to wash one another's feet. You and I need to be lovable. We need to be humble. We cannot make it to heaven if we are not humble and if we don't love. What does it say in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 about knowledge without love? It puffs up. You need to have both. You cannot afford to be arrogant. You know what? There's another lesson I like here, and I'm going to miss it if I don't tell you. Jesus never exposed Judas' sin. You get that? But Judas was keeping it a secret. When things are good, you never cover it up. You never hide it away. You always, but when you have to hide something away, alarm bells need to go off. You need to know something's wrong with this. But it's not Jesus' job to expose Judas. It's Judas' job to understand he's being covert. He's being secretive. He needs to come out like Peter and be overt and say things that aren't right and let God fix it. Verse 15, for I have given you an example that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly I say to you, a servant is no greater than his master, nor a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. Is there anybody here that does not want a blessing from God? Right? You want to have a blessing from God? Very, very simply, all you've got to do is do what Jesus did. Now, Peter didn't understand it at that day, but Peter would understand it. Peter would get up one day and say, repent and be baptized, every one of you, for the remission of your sins, and you shall receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. You want to be humble. You want to know what this feels like? Before we leave, pick up a cardboard in the entrance hall. Let's pretend they're there. And take a marker and let's pretend there's markers. Write Acts 2 verse 38 on it and go and stand on all the major intersections of Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky with a sign and shout out what Peter finally realized. And you will know what it means to be full of love and be very humble. It's not easy. Now, you don't have to do something that extreme, but I know he's asking us to show love and humility. If you're subject to the gospel invitation today, if you want to come forward to die for your sins, be buried with Jesus in baptism, to raise, to walk in your life, or if you just need the prayers of this church to be strengthened again because you are very discouraged or because you know who Judas is or whatever it is, whatever your need is, please come forward right now as together we stand and sing.